Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I am your host, Benedikt. If you are new to the show, welcome for joining us. If you are already a listener, thank you so much for coming back. And if you got any value out of the past episodes that you've listened to, please go to your podcast app that you use, preferably Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review there, 5 stars, and like a few nice sentences about the show. This would really help us reach more people like you. We appreciate that, so thank you for this. Finally, if you need help making exciting records from your home studio or your jam space, go to the selfrecordingband.com/call and book a free first one-on-one coaching call with me to get personal feedback on your music, recordings, and mixes, answers to your most pressing audio questions, and a plan and step-by-step roadmap to help you record and release exciting sounding music consistently. Now, as always, today I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. Good to see you, Malcolm. Hello.
Hey, buddy. It's good to see you, man. It's been too long. We missed a week. I guess the listeners won't know that, but I missed you.
I totally missed you. Absolutely. I missed recording this podcast. This is such an important thing on a Monday, like to start the week. I don't know. It's
a fixture in our life now. Yes, it's been an exciting time since I've seen you, man. I've been on boats working with the Coast Guard, doing some crazy stuff up northern BC. Couple plane rides, went camping. It's been epic.
Yep, sounds like it. So was it all? But part of it was work, and part of it was not, probably. Right?
Part of it was work, and part of it was not. It was work and pleasure. And then I even got to mix a song in there as well, or a couple songs I think actually. So it's been very cool.
So let me ask you, what's the ratio these days between like your? If you're new to the podcast, I need to explain. Probably Malcolm does. Is it called location sound, film sound?
It's called location sound, production sound, but essentially, like the easiest way to explain it is that I do sound for television on set. Yeah. So I'm on location of wherever we're filming, wherever the camera is. I'm also there, getting the audio.
Do you do post for that too, or do you just capture it on set?
I just capture it. Yeah, I don't do post. I leave that to the specialists. It's something I've dabbled in before. Not sure it's for me. I like music post, mixing, mixing and mastering. But like for television, I like being the guy on set. So I just kind of chose to niche down and specialize in that instead.
And you kind of have to, I don't know if that's true, but I think you told me at some point that you are in charge of like the audio in general on set. You have to sort of sometimes build a team or like handle the whole thing. It's not just holding the mic, but you are in charge of making sure that it's captured properly, whatever that takes.
Yeah. If it could mean putting together a team, it could mean many technical things that have to be figured out in advance. It can get pretty complicated to make it all work and make sure that the right people are hearing what they need to hear, because not everybody needs to be listening to the same thing necessarily. Sometimes we're filming 2 different conversations at once, and I have to figure that out,
Yeah, I've said it before, like this whole world is something I don't know a lot about, and it scares the crap out of me. I stopped mixing live shows years ago because that would give me anxiety and like would make me nervous and like the pressure and everything. But what you do on a film set like that is like seems even worse. But to me at least.
It's funny because I also don't do live music for that reason. I just like no thank you. I like my controlled environments with music.
Yeah, totally. Maybe it's a different thing, I don't know. But what I wanted to ask is, what's the ratio these days between that and say like mixing and music production? How much of each of those do you do these days?
Most of this year it has been mostly television. Definitely that's been the majority. But that said, I've been mixing songs every month. By no means has music mixing and mastering stopped. It's just been a lot of big television jobs that have me traveling as well. And then, but I kind of think the end of this year, the TVs, all the shows have kind of wrapped. So I think I'm going to be mostly doing music for the rest of the year, which will be a kind of cool change of pace.
Yeah, totally. And I wonder if that is actually a good thing. I think it is actually a good thing that you have these completely different but still somehow related things that you do, because I find like most people that I know, and myself included, if you work on the same thing or on music all of the time, I don't know, sometimes you just need a break. Sometimes you need to do something else. And I think if you go out, do something completely different, and then come back to the studio, I think you will do better work compared to someone who's like there 24/7 basically all the time. Assuming that you have, of course, you've reached a certain level of like experience and skill. In the beginning, I think you have to just put in the hours until you get good enough. But once you're sort of there and can maintain that, and of course you still want to grow, but you've reached a certain level, I think doing a little less but more focused and having breaks in between is actually good for your work. I was talking to Brian McTernan on a show last week. I went to a show. Brian McTernan is one of my favorite producers in the hardcore punk rock world, and he was on tour in Europe with his band, and I finally got to meet him in person. We've only talked online before and on my other podcast. And I was talking to him about this, and he says, like, he's quite a bit older than me, but he says for that reason, he tries to only produce 2 records a year at this point, like full production, because he really wants to be fully present with the artists all the time, be there in pre-production and writing and the actual tracking and then mixing and all of that. And he wants to do that properly and like put everything he has into that. But he feels like doing more than that, plus having his own band, which is a thing in his case, feels like he doesn't have the creative, enough creative energy or creativity to give for those big projects. And I mean, these are big bands and big projects and stuff. But I found it interesting to hear that somebody would limit himself to 2 records a year, basically, these days. Yeah. And he does mixing on top of that additionally, but like the full productions where he really is involved a lot, no more than 2. And I found that really remarkable.
Yeah, I find that I don't think it makes me quicker at mixing, taking these breaks, because the muscle memory slows down a little bit and stuff like that. But the advantage is that I come back really fresh and creative, having like just not been really listening to music and not being in these 4 walls that I'm in right now for a time of period. I come back like really creative. And because of the break, I think some of my like habits have been broken as well. So I might just, reach for a different tool all of a sudden and try that out, when that can lead to some really cool results as well. So yeah, it's been good. As long as I keep doing enough mixing, I think it's going to work out just fine.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, you have to at least maintain it and ideally still grow, because things change and you want to get better, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I find it interesting that I think it's actually a good thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm spending too much time in the studio at a time, basically, without a break in between.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it happens to all of us. I mean, all right, so let's get to today's episode. Completely different thing again, but it's always good to catch up, especially when we skipped a week. So today's episode is like one of these. I don't even want to say the title because it's like it sounds so clickbaity, but it's. I think it's it's going to be a really good episode. The title of the episode is "Don't Believe These 5 Myths About Music Production," and the idea for that episode came from an email that I sent out last year that I got a lot of positive responses to, and I put some thought into this email, of course, and there's substance to it, and we're going to go through that, because I sent this email out and I came up with this because a lot of people make music production more complicated than it needs to be. They limit themselves unnecessarily by following quote-unquote rules that they should have ignored right away. And we're going to give you 5 examples of common music production myths and explain why they are not true and why you shouldn't let them get in your way. Yes. So we're basically going through these 5 and tell you why we think you shouldn't listen to those.
Yes, I think it's okay to have a clickbait title like we do with this one. Don't believe these 5 myths about music production if we're dispelling clickbait.
Yeah, exactly, totally.
It's using clickbait to fight clickbait.
Totally, exactly. And to me, the definition of clickbait would be to have a title like that, but then not follow through with the content, basically. You click on it and then it's a disappointment, which is not the case in this case. So you won't regret opening that email or listening to this episode, hopefully. All right, let's go. The first one is don't EQ or compress more than X amount.
Mm-hmm. This one.
What do you think of that?
Oh man, this one actually hurt the growth of my career for a long time. I think, like me trying to figure out how to both engineer and mix in the post as well. Like it just slowed everything down because I was too afraid to do what I needed to do to get it to be what I wanted, because I read, if you don't need to compress more than 2 dB or 4 dB, just tap the meters. That's all you need to do. And it's like, well, it makes 0 sense. There's 0 sense behind that. Like you have to compress it as much as it needs is really what it boils down to. And you have to EQ it. If you need it to be a certain amount of brightness in your vocal or whatever, then you need to do more than the little tiny move that some guy on YouTube told me to do,
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't even get what we are afraid of when we listen to this. I mean, I did the same thing. I thought you aren't supposed to do more than whatever. But then I'm thinking about it now is what have we been afraid of? What could happen, It's like Chris Lord LG said, I've heard it in an interview once, and he's been quoted a couple of times. He said, like, no one's gonna die.
Yeah.
Basically, like that's if a guitar, I think in his case he was boosting, I don't know, 12 dB top end on a guitar or something, where everybody tells you not to do a lot to distorted guitars. But if the guitar needs it because it's not bright enough, then I mean, by all means, do it.
No
right?
one's gonna die. I love that. That's so true.
No one's gonna die. Yeah.
Now I will say that I think that more people struggle with this on compression than EQ, because compression is harder to hear and understand.
Yes.
It takes some ear training to really know what you're doing with a compressor. So that's why it's scary to, slam something and not really be able to tell what you did. Just know that it's different. But that is, again, if you ignore this myth, don't EQ or compress more than X amount, if you just ignore that and just go nuts, you're going to figure it out sooner. You're going to be listening to more extreme examples, and hearing compression in the extreme is when you can really tell what's going on, I think. That's how I learned, is cranked it up. Then when you're playing with your attack and release, you can actually tell the difference, because you're really mangling the audio and hearing different results. So do the opposite of this rule to start, and then work backwards.
Thank you for saying that, because I have in my coaching program, if you're part of the coaching program, I have what's called action plans in there, which are assignments that consist of content and then exercises and then my feedback that I give to people. And one of them is called Hearing, Understanding, and Using Compression. And there is like an exercise and a video that explains like a method that I use to sort of unlock what compression actually is and understand it. And then at the end of it, there's two additional steps. When people go through that the first time, they often ask, like, what am I gaining from doing this? Why am I supposed to do this? What's the benefit, basically? Because I don't get it. And the assignment is what you just said. It's like, I'm literally reading it right now. It's like, compress a track heavily to add color and make it really consistent, then use volume automation to add dynamics back in. That's part of it, to really make something super consistent and then get the dynamics otherwise, just to hear what that sounds like and to really compress something until it doesn't move anymore, basically.
Right.
And this is not to say that you have to do that every single time. That's an additional, after we got it right, that's an additional exercise. And then the last one is like, squash something really hard, pay attention to the unwanted side effects, because sometimes you have to push things to the extremes to figure out how far you can go. That's like a summary of what's in there. But but I'm saying go crazy here. The goal is to smash something as hard as you can in order to test the limits and make it sound exciting and figure out where it craps out, basically. So this is literally an exercise in my program because of that reason that you just explained. You have to test the limits and see how far you can go. And then you're like, oh, all right, until this point it made sense. But now it starts to become like, now it starts sounding weird. And you don't know how, if you stop before you reach that, you don't know, have you applied 50% or 60% or 80%? Like, how close are you?
Yeah, exactly. That one, I'm passionate about it. It just drives me nuts.
Yeah, me too. And every professional producer that we talk to says the same thing, because there's no rule in either direction. The secret is knowing how much a track needs and then not being afraid of doing the right thing or like nothing at all. So I have sessions where there's a huge plugin chain on every single track, and then there are other sessions with like 10 plugins in the whole song, whatever the song needs. And so there's no rule in either direction, I think. That's really the secret. And everybody will tell you that. Like, nobody has the one thing that they always do.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Myth number 2. My favorite classic records sound so good because they used all this amazing vintage gear back then.
Nope.
Exactly. Yeah,
Don't get us wrong.
It's part of it.
Yes.
It's part of it. It can be part of it. If people have good gear and know how to use it, that's part of the magic. But it's definitely not the main reason why you love these records. Definitely not.
No, definitely not. I think if all those people were in a room again today, they would make an amazing record again using modern tools.
Yep. I would even go as far and say they sound so good despite the fact that they didn't have all the powerful tools we all have today. That's actually more accurate, I think, because they would have killed for some of the stuff that we can use today.
Yeah.
And maybe the limitations led to better records indirectly, because maybe the gear was part of it, but not because it sounds so good, but because it forced people to capture magic moments, to perform better, to be better musicians. And as much as I love the fact that everybody can do it from their homes now, obviously, I think for the quality of like the big records out there, it was kind of good that not everybody could do it. So that you had to be good and you had to have access to a studio and you had to have this team and all of that. And it had to be right, because otherwise people would lose their jobs and money and all of that. So I think the limitations and the way the music industry was structured forced people to just be better in front of the mic and to write better songs. And that's part of why we love these records so much. And it can still be done today if you take it seriously. And it's great that the gatekeepers are gone and all of that. But I think they had to work around limitations, which might have had an effect on it. But it's not the gear itself. It's like actually irrelevant. I mean, yes, good gear helps, but it's never been the number one thing that makes records great.
Yeah, totally.
And you always have to think about like what a listener thinks when they listen to your track. Like just with the first myth, nobody ever said like, this song's awesome, but I wish they would have achieved that with less processing or whatever. Nobody ever said that when listening to a record, you know?
That'd be the most nerdy thing.
Yeah, like whoever, like nobody ever said that. And with this myth number 2, it's the same thing. Nobody ever listened to a record and was like, I mean, music people maybe do, or like studio nerds like we are, but like normal music listeners, they hear the song and they make a decision of whether they like the song or not. But they don't care what gear you use, and they wouldn't hear the difference most of the time anyways. Anyway, I think it should be obvious.
Side tangent here. Have you seen the Netflix show Metal Lords?
No.
Oh my God, it's funny. It's like a teenager coming of age, like high school movie, you know, but it's like these two guys, and one's just like a metalhead elitist, you know, like the type where he's like, just like how fast can he like shred is like everything in his life and metal is life kind of thing. And it's like,
awesome.
He hates everything else. Oh God, it's so funny. But it's kind of like, there's a parallel to the people that are like analog tape is everything. It's like the only way kind of thing. It's just like, so out of context.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a really great analogy. It's actually the same thing. And because you said tape, if you think about it, this is all not like magic or some voodoo that we can't, where we don't know what exactly happened. We exactly know what happened. So, which means if we like the sound of tape or tubes or a certain piece of vintage gear, we can easily analyze that. We can get to the core of why it sounds the way it sounds, and then we can reproduce the same result with different tools that we have now available. So you just have to know what it is. It's not magic. You have to know what it is that makes a certain piece of gear sound good, and then you can recreate that. And that might mean you have to put like 2 or 3 plugins together to create the same thing. But if once you know what it is that you're after, it's no longer that one piece of gear that can do it. It's just, you know, like
Great
not
point.
the tools, not at all. And then I think also the final thing I want to say about this is just stop blaming the gear, basically, because a lot of people say that or think that is true, because if they would have to admit that it's not the gear, then that would mean like it's them or their song or their performance or how they record. So, but as soon as you can do that, then you'll get better, because then you work on the right things. And the people who always blame the gear and who chase plugin after plugin after plugin or analog gear or whatever, they rarely get better because they are investing in the wrong type of thing. And the sooner you can realize that it's not the gear, but it's actually you and your song and how you record it, the sooner you make progress. So just stop blaming gear and put in the work.
Entirely.
Cool. Myth number 3. You need a perfectly treated, flat-sounding room and high-end monitors to achieve great-sounding mixes that translate well to the outside world. This is a hot topic because some people would agree, but I don't.
It certainly helps, is what I'll say about this one.
Yes.
There's no denying that this one has merit, but
there's nothing wrong about it.
Yes, there's nothing wrong about it.
In this case, there's nothing wrong about it. Yeah.
And if it's, you know, a worthwhile, if there's stuff that you don't need to invest in before this, then sure, go ahead, invest in great flat monitors. But I know some people that mix like literally Apple earbuds that do amazing work.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, it's, as you said, the fact that it helps, like, nobody would argue with that. That's true. But I don't think you need it. It's the first thing I would invest in. If I start to invest in gear and stuff, the first thing I would do is like invest in the room acoustics and monitoring.
Yes,
headphones,
room acoustics,
or
100%.
Yeah, headphones or monitors. And if monitors, then also room acoustics. So that would be the first thing I would invest in, definitely. But if you ask the question if you need it, I don't think so, because there are relatively simple ways to make a less than ideal space work well enough. So this means, and the question was like a perfectly treated flat sounding room. I mean, there is no such thing to begin with. Every room is flawed, but as soon as you can control the sort of worst aspects of your room, you'll be able to learn what your monitoring system sounds like. You just have to spend a lot of time on it and really learn it. And then you will also learn how to deal with the flaws. That's one thing. So you just need to get close, which you can do relatively easily. It doesn't have to be crazy expensive. And then there's other things like headphones or headphones plus Sonarworks, which is a very flat, linear sounding reference. And it's different to mixing on speakers. But if once you learn what a mix sounds like on those, you can absolutely put out great work.
Yeah.
Only with those headphones and maybe Sonarworks. And I've just seen too many people at this point work out of spaces like that or just on headphones.
Yeah.
And I just know it works. And my room is far from perfect too. I've invested in it and I've built stuff, but it's like a standard room with some absorbers on the walls and it's not rocket science. So
yeah, neither of our studios are purpose built. They were already buildings, right? So we made them work. And I will say that like I think investing in like for if you're a mixer, like Benny and I are, investing in room acoustics is probably the smartest way to spend our money, especially when it's an empty room to begin with. Like there's a bare minimum you can hit really easy that's like so insanely worth the money. But again, it's like they're not perfect. My room is like really small compared to what an ideal room is. And I have, put money into making it sound as good as it can to an extent. I could tear down walls and rebuild the thing, but I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. So I just did what I could do, within a reasonable budget and stuff and time, and then got to work on learning it and just mixing in it and getting good at it. And that's all you need to do.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Number 4. This is one of my favorites. And I've ignored that for the longest time, or I didn't know about it until I made the test and figured out what I'm about to tell you. So number 4 is the guitar tone is in the amp, and you gotta turn it up loud to make those tubes sound really great. That's what so many guitarists have told me over the years on live stages when I told them to turn their amps down, or in the studio. That's what every guitarist sort of thinks, at least in the beginning. And it's just not true for various reasons. What do you think about it?
I agree. I think there's some amps that sound totally sweet when they're pushed, but like it's not all of them. And more so that I've only had good results in like the cranking it as loud as I can thing in a room where I've got like a really good isolation between where the amp is and where I am, so I can actually tell what I've mic'd up. Like when I was first trying to do it, I was like the amp was in the room with me. I was like, yeah, it sounds screaming, but like I couldn't even tell if I had placed the microphone right or if I'd chosen the right speaker. Like all these things that are more important, I couldn't actually hear because it was so loud. So unless you've got like a really good isolated place to put your amp and you can tell what you're getting out of the speakers, what you're actually recording, I think you're better off actually recording quieter so you can tell what you're capturing.
Absolutely. And I've sort of broken it down into 2 parts, like my thoughts on this. The first part was that, first of all, the guitar tone is not the most important stuff about the guitar tone, to me at least, is not even in the amp, let alone the power amp. It's just, in fact, to me, the guitar, the player, the cab, and the mic are all more important than the amp head. To me. So, of course, you need an amp that's appropriate for the genre. And it matters if you use like a Vox or a rectifier. That's a different type of amp. Yeah. But within the same category of amps, I'd say just pick one you like and then compare different cabs, compare different guitars, and let different people play with the same rig, and you will be blown away by the differences. If you just swap out the amp, you'll be surprised by how small the difference can be compared to all these other things. So that's the first part of it, that the amp is not even the biggest thing compared to everything else on the chain.
Yeah.
And then the second part is, once you sort of you get to the amp, then within the amp, the power amp tone, which is what you push when you turn it up loud, is the last thing you need to worry about. Like 90% of it can be sweet. I totally agree with what you said, Malcolm. But 90% of the amp's tone is in the preamp and not the power amp. It's in the way it distorts, like what the gain sounds like. It's in the equalizer. It's in all of it that happens in the preamp. And the power amp was built to make it loud and drive a speaker. That's what it was built for. And it was built to be transparent. Yes, of course, if you push it really hard, it also adds distortion and it can sound really nice. But that's just a small part of it. And it doesn't matter nearly as much as people think. And it can have side effects too. Some people don't realize that there is a sweet spot and that cranking doesn't mean cranking it all the way. Most of the time, that's too far. And like somewhere, you have to figure out where the sweet spot actually is, which is pretty hard to do because that will be super loud in the room. And it's very hard to judge that standing in front of the amp. So it requires a lot of testing at different volumes because you can't judge that standing in front of an amp that's like super cranked. And figuring out that sweet spot is really hard. And then there's other side effects. It can cause the speaker to compress, which depending on the type of speaker you use, the speaker itself adds distortion and compression when you turn it up loud. And so you might think it's the amp, but it's actually the speaker. And if you swap out speakers, it's going to react completely differently.
Yep.
If you use a power soak or attenuator or something like that, it's going to be completely different. So long story short, if you know what you're doing and you have an amp that reacts very well when you push it, then it can be sweet, but it is not the thing that makes the guitar sound great. And there's a lot of things that are more important. And I'd say just do a test yourself and be honest to yourself. Like record an amp at a reasonable master volume level, reasonably low, using the best cab, mic position, etc. you can come up with. Then turn up the master volume significantly. Make sure your recording doesn't clip, of course. Use the exact same cab, recording setup as before. And then compare those two results at equal volume in a blind test in your DAW. And then you will figure out that most of the difference was just because a loud amp feels awesome when you stand in front of it. And you might even prefer the quiet version depending on your settings and the way the amp reacts. But it won't be a night and day difference in most cases, and it might be different than what you thought it would be. So use the same exact recording setup, record it loud and record it quietly, then level match the two in the DAW, and then listen and do a blind test and see what you like better. And that's what I would do.
Yeah, you got to experiment. We're both big preachers of learning your gear. So if you got an amp, you should be playing with it and figuring out different ways of recording it and just comparing and seeing which ways you like. Maybe you do have to have it loud to get it how you like it, but maybe you don't. And like, again, you probably don't have a great isolation chamber for your amp. So if you can record it at a lower level, you can play better because you can hear what you're listening to.
Yeah. And it's also encouraging because that means if you can't turn your amp up, not all is lost. You can take your beloved amp home and use a load box or something and just capture the amp and then use an IR, and it's totally fine. It's like... It's not that you can't record because you can't turn it up wherever you are. Like that's the good news here.
Yes,
I think
it's great news.
All right, and then the final one. Do you want to add anything to this, or can we go to the final one?
We can totally go into the next one.
Okay,
here.
Awesome. So this is more. This is probably one of those more or less monologue episodes. I'm sorry for that, but I was very passionate about this email that I wrote and about this outline, so I know it very well. That's why I go through this. All right, the fifth one is drum samples. Not only drum samples, but it's drum samples, amp sims, editing, vocal tuning, etc. People say that this stuff has sucked the life out of music. Robots are killing the vibe. Especially drum samples is the one that I hear a lot, but the other stuff too. So drum samples, amp sims, editing, vocal tuning, etc. have sucked the life out of music. Robots are killing the vibe. What do we say to that?
I'm hoping that we don't really even need to say this. Yeah. We're gonna talk about it, but like I'm hoping that if you're a listener to this podcast, if we've been doing our job correctly, Benny and I here, you agree with everything, or you disagree with that whole sentence already.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, like the last 10 mixes I've done, I've used drum samples, amp sims, editing, and vocal tuning on all of them.
Yes.
The robots have done really well for me, apparently. It's this shouldn't be a conversation in 2022 here. It's just so obviously that these are powerful tools that can be so helpful, especially for self-recording bands where they don't have every gadget and tool available to them. This can help us just take it the rest of the way to a professional result. So I don't even know where to start. Which one of these do you think is still mostly considered? I think most people agree now that this isn't an issue, that you can use all these, but if there's one on this that you think people still get hung up on, what do you think it is?
It's difficult because I would think, depends on who you ask. I kind of know what it is because I talk to a lot of musicians and people and I know what they are sort of afraid of or think is wrong. I don't know if that is necessarily what I personally would think it is, but as I said, I'm biased here. But so what I know it is, or at least from my bubble, might be different for other people, but from my experience, musicians are mostly afraid of, I can't even tell because even within the musicians, guitarists are afraid of amp sims and drummers are afraid of drum samples. Yeah, sort of everybody's afraid of drum samples a little bit. So I'd say within musicians, drum samples is the biggest thing for me, at least. Maybe that's part of the genres that I'm in, but like drum samples is the biggest one where I get most, not pushback because most people agree that you can use it, but like that's the one that people are afraid of sort of the most, I think. Guitar players are sort of hesitant with amp sims, but not as much anymore. But everybody's sort of hesitant when it comes to drum samples in some genres. But when you ask the public, I think it absolutely is editing and vocal tuning. Like the fact that you are correcting someone's performance basically means that you're cheating, and that to them it means that you're cheating, and that you suck the life out of it, and that it's not the original performance anymore, and that imperfections are important and make music great. And sort of, I think most people would say that vocal tuning and editing is the worst, and musicians, I think, will, at least in my world, often say that drum samples are the no-go or like what makes things robotic.
I think you're right. I think editing vocal and vocal tuning are the things that people that have no experience recording say.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they've tried to record themselves, they're like, "Oh, please use those tools to help me." And then drum samples, until they've had a professional mixer, they're scared of them, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I think I think you're right that most people have accepted, or like not accepted, but they are happy for these tools. It's not like something bad that we have to live with. It's like great that we have it. So, and most people, I think, realize that and how powerful it is. That's good. And I think the people who are afraid of it or who think it sucks the life out of music, it's not your fault if you think that. I think you've either had a bad experience because somebody maybe did something to your music who didn't know what they were doing. That could be the case. Or you tried it yourself and didn't really know what you were doing. Or you've heard some purist YouTuber or podcaster, or I don't know, somebody tell you that this is wrong, because they are out there.
Yes.
And you will always find those kinds of people. And there's we rarely have a black or white sort of solution or opinion here, because we know that it's about your ears and the way your taste and the way you make decisions. It's never about the tools that are available to you. But some people will tell you that using certain tools is plain wrong. And if you listen to one of those, then that might be where this comes from. But I think some people also just have had a bad experience, because it's not that drum samples or editing is bad. It's when you do it in a way that's not tasteful. It's when your drums sound like machine guns when they are not supposed to, or it's when you sound like T-Pain when you actually want transparent vocal tuning.
Yeah.
That's what you don't want, and that might be what went wrong in your case. But you can use these tools very transparently, make it sound completely organic, or you can use them on purpose very obviously and create effects with them and everything in between. So It's never the tools, it's just how you use them.
Absolutely. Yeah. They can further your vision in whatever direction you want if you know how to use them correctly.
Yeah. And again, be honest to yourself and make an experiment. Like, record your drums and then put drum samples on them, or let somebody put drum samples on them who knows what he or she's doing, and make two versions of a mix or whatever and compare the two, and then just be honest and be like, which one sounds better? If you can pull it off, I'd say if you, especially in a DIY recording environment, if you can pull it off that your real recorded drums sound better and work better in the mix than the same kit plus good samples in the hands of an experienced mixer, if you can pull that off, then kudos, like hats off to you, because that's really, really hard to do. So just do the test and see what you sound better, and then what you like better, and then just use whatever makes the song feel good, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, these were the 5 myths. I hope this was helpful. I hope you agree. And the bottom line is, don't believe in these hard rules, I think, or at least be skeptical when you see something like that. There's rarely a hard rule or black or white thing in this world.
Yeah. If you just remember that your goal is to make things exactly how you want them to sound, you'll be fine. You can use whatever you want to get there. Use any means necessary to make it sound how you want it to sound, and you'll be pretty happy.
Yes.
As long as other people agree with that also sounding good.
Yes, exactly. That would be good. Yes. In those cases. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
For sure. See you next week, everyone. Bye.